To secure her inheritance in a man's world, she lived a double life. By day her father's obedient secretary, by night his forbidden heir. But when her secret swelled into life itself, the lies threatened to collapse in the smoke of the furnaces. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments before we begin, because this is not just a tale of power, it's a war for survival. The year was 1922, and the coal-dusted city of Essen rattled with the clang of steel and the groan of freight trains. Smoke rose in low clouds from the furnaces of Friedrich Hohenberg's empire, a man whose fortune had been forged not in gentility, but in iron, sweat, and relentless calculation. His mills sprawled across the Ruhr like dark cathedrals, and in their glow, his daughter moved as both a hidden observer and an indispensable presence. Her name was Clara Hohenberg. To the clerks, the foreman, and the silent household staff, she was simply Fräulein Clara, the secretary who lingered too long at her father's study desk, cataloguing ledgers and dictating correspondence in a hand more graceful than any man's but just as precise. Few understood that she was not merely the custodian of his affairs, but his only heir, shaped under his stern eye and concealed behind the careful disguise of servitude. For Friedrich, appearances mattered. A daughter was not to inherit a dynasty of steel outright. Such a notion would invite mockery, lawsuits, and vultures in the form of boardroom rivals. Better that she remain the secretary, the invisible hand recording, signing, and directing in his name. Better that the world mistake her for a loyal aide than discover the truth, that the Hohenberg Empire, should he collapse from the apoplexy that increasingly darkened his brow, would pass to her. Clara had grown used to the masquerade. In the evenings she shed her stiff collar and spectacles, walking the streets in a dark cloak, tasting anonymity in the cafes where young men recited revolutionary verses, or in the smoky salons where women whispered of votes and rights. But in the daylight hours she bent over invoices, her handwriting steady even when her father's voice thundered with orders. Yet the more she lived in two worlds, the more perilous the balance became. There was the world of steel, with its ledgers, shipments, and contracts signed in coal dust. And there was the world of flesh, of stolen hours with a man whose touch was warmth against the cold marble of the Hohenberg estate. He was not her father's equal, nor even a man her father would have named respectable. But he was the one who saw her not as a secretary, not as an heir concealed behind ink and discipline, but as Clara, breathing, laughing, and alive. And it was from that hidden life that the tremor of change arose, more dangerous than the strikes of miners or the whispers of political unrest. For Clara, heir of the iron magnate, had conceived a child. The knowledge beat in her veins with both terror and fierce exultation. She would carry into the future not only her father's empire, but a secret lineage of her own. Yet to reveal it would be to unravel the careful veil her father had spun around her. To remain silent would mean a solitude that might one day consume her. In the corridors of the Hohenberg house, with its oil portraits and echoing halls, Clara felt the walls press closer. She had spent years inhabiting a lie with discipline, but now the lie was swelling within her, impossible to confine, and so the double life of the magnate's daughter began to crack. Winter had settled heavy on the Ruhr Valley. The canals froze in jagged sheets, trains hissed steam into the grey air, and even the sprawling ironworks seemed to creak beneath the weight of snow. Within the Hohenberg estate, a mansion built less for beauty than for intimidation, the walls held a deeper chill, the kind that no fire could entirely conquer. Clara had grown up among those walls, and she knew every room by its silence. The dining hall, with its long table polished to a black sheen, echoed with her father's coughs more than with laughter. The library, lined with volumes of economics, metallurgy, and military histories, held almost no novels, though she had smuggled one or two and tucked them behind ledgers. The study, Friedrich Hohenberg's true throne, smelled of ink, sealing wax, and the faint metallic tang that clung to him no matter how many times he washed. It was in that study she lived most of her hours, bending over papers while her father dictated with his harsh voice that could cut through the clamor of furnaces. She had learned long ago that to serve as secretary was to serve as shadow. Her presence was expected but unnoticed, her diligence praised yet never acknowledged in company. When industrialists visited, she stood at the corner of the desk, writing swiftly but silently. If they glanced at her at all, they saw not the daughter of the empire but a pale young woman with a sharp gaze, too quick with her pen to be dismissed, too self-contained to be flirted with. What none of them knew was that she was often more than stenographer. It was her calculations that corrected the shipping tallies, her memoranda that uncovered waste and theft, her caution that prevented Friedrich from being outmaneuvered in contracts. When her father scowled at her notes, but followed them nonetheless, Clara felt the secret pulse of triumph. But her life was no longer confined to figures and ink. At night, when the gas lights dimmed and the mansion servants crept away to their quarters, Clara slipped through the city like a shadow. She pulled on a plain wool coat, bound her hair in a scarf, and left behind the identity of secretary. In backstreet cafes, she listened to young men rail against the Krupps and Hohenbergs of the world, their words dangerous and fiery. She said little but watched much. In one such place, low ceilings, a piano whose notes were more memory than music, she had met Eric. He was a mechanic from the steelworks, his hands calloused, his voice unrefined. He had no illusions about the power of men like her father. Yet with Clara he did not speak of revolution or despair. He spoke of music he wished to learn, of forests he had walked as a boy, of the dream of building something of his own. She, who had always been treated as extension of her father's empire, felt in his words the astonishing sensation of being seen. Their meetings were quiet, cautious, but soon they became something more. A room above a tavern, a narrow bed, a body pressed to hers with a tenderness she had not imagined possible. And now her body changed. At first she thought it mere exhaustion, the weariness of long hours, the weight of secrets. But as the weeks passed, and her courses failed to come, a dawning certainty took root. She felt it most acutely in the stillness of night, when her hand drifted to her abdomen, when she felt both terror and strange joy at the life within. The terror came from her father. Friedrich Hohenberg, whose will bent steel and broke rivals, would not tolerate such scandal. A daughter, unmarried, carrying the child of a worker. He would see it as betrayal, folly, ruin. The dynasty was to be preserved, not diluted. He had plans for her, even if they were never spoken, to remain at his side, to inherit not as a woman but as the mask of his authority. The joy came from Eric. In his arms she found something freer than the empire's chains. Though he knew nothing yet of the child, Clara imagined his rough hands gentling at the thought, his voice breaking into laughter when she told him. She imagined a life away from the house of iron, small, precarious, but truly hers. Yet fantasy could not eclipse the real. Each morning she returned to the study, ink-stained fingers hiding the tremor of her secret. Her father watched her with hawk's eyes, measuring her efficiency, never suspecting the reason her cheeks flushed or her hand sometimes strayed unconsciously to her stomach. But secrets never held forever in a house like Hohenberg's. Servants noticed patterns. The cook muttered about changes in appetite. The maid who brushed Clara's gowns noted the loosening fit at the waist. And outside, the mills roared, strikes whispered, and rivals circled like wolves. Clara stood at the center of two storms, the empire of iron her father had built and the fragile, growing future inside her. To save one might mean destroying the other. To choose both was to risk all. The snow outside thickened. Within the estate, the fire hissed, but the cold only deepened. The thaw came late in 1922. By March, the frozen canals broke apart in jagged seams, ice drifting sluggishly downriver while barges resumed their passage beneath bridges blackened by soot. Essen groaned back to life with the spring. Strikes had rippled through the winter months, but the furnaces burned again, and Friedrich Hohenberg's empire exhaled steam as if nothing could shake it. Yet in the mansion on the hill, silence carried a weight Clara had never known before. Her father's health had declined further, his coughs longer, his temper sharper. He relied upon her more than ever, dictating endless correspondence to foreign buyers, revising contracts with the French whose soldiers still occupied the Ruhr, and battling against tariffs and reparations that gnawed at his profits. Clara worked tirelessly, recording, calculating, devising. She was indispensable now, though still invisible to the world, and she was nearing the 4th month of her pregnancy. The secret grew harder to conceal. Dresses hung differently on her frame. Her face, once sharp with exhaustion, softened with subtle changes. The household staff had learned long ago not to gossip within her hearing, but she could sense the murmurings in lowered voices, the way glances lingered just a beat too long. One evening, while Clara sat at her desk reviewing the day's accounts, her father's voice cracked the air. "You're pale." She lifted her head. He stood at the window, his broad shoulders stiff beneath his wool suit. His hair, once black as coal, was streaked with grey, but his eyes remained sharp. "I'm well enough," Clara replied. "You're working too hard. Even a secretary has limits." The word struck her. Secretary. He never called her daughter when business was at hand, though the resemblance was written plainly in their faces. A slip, she thought, would be her undoing. "I manage," she said, closing the ledger carefully. Friedrich studied her. For a moment she feared he saw everything, the slight swell beneath her bodice, the way her hand twitched toward her stomach before she caught herself. But he only turned back to the window and muttered about shipments delayed by French patrols. It was a narrow escape, but Clara knew the time of concealment was shrinking. At night, she sought refuge in Eric's arms. His room above the tavern smelled of sawdust and tobacco, a far cry from the polished austerity of the mansion. She had told him nothing yet. Each time she opened her mouth to speak, the words froze. She would see his face lit with candlelight, hear his laugh when he teased her about her serious expressions, and the confession would die on her tongue. Perhaps it was cowardice. Perhaps it was selfishness. Perhaps it was the desperate desire to keep, for a little longer, the fragile illusion that their world was simple. But Eric was not blind. One evening, as they lay beneath a threadbare blanket, he traced her cheek with his hand and said, "You're carrying some heavy secret, Clara. I feel it every time you come through that door." Her heart seized. "What makes you think that? You breathe differently. You hold yourself like someone waiting to be struck." She wanted to cry then, to tell him everything, that his child grew within her, that she feared her father's wrath, that she balanced between empire and exile. But instead she kissed him, fierce and wordless, as though her body could explain what her voice could not. The silence gnawed at her. By day, it threatened to betray her before her father. By night, it pressed against her chest as she lay beside Eric. And all the while the child grew, a truth that would not be hidden forever. Her breaking point came unexpectedly. It was a Sunday afternoon, when the city was quiet and even the mills seemed to rest. Clara sat alone in the library, reading not ledgers but a forbidden volume of poetry she had stolen from a bookseller's stall years before. Her father's footsteps echoed down the hall, slow and deliberate. He entered without knocking. "What is that?" he demanded, his eyes narrowing on the slim book in her hands. Clara shut it quickly. "Only something to pass the time. You waste yourself with nonsense." He snatched the book and tossed it onto the desk. "Your duty is here, not in fancies." The words struck harder than they should have. Something inside her snapped. Weeks of fear, months of secrecy, years of servitude. Her voice rose before she could stop it. "Do you think I am nothing but a machine, Father? Do you think I have no life beyond your ledgers?" His eyes blazed. "Your life is this house, my empire. Without it, you are nothing. You would not survive a day outside." The child inside her seemed to twist at that moment, a reminder of the truth he did not know. Her throat burned with the words she longed to hurl. "I carry life. I carry your heir's future, though not in the way you imagine." But she swallowed them. Her father turned away, muttering about discipline, about ungratefulness. He left her shaking in the silence of the library, her hands pressed tight against her belly. The weight of silence had become unbearable. She could no longer keep the secret hidden. The first buds of spring crept timidly into the gardens of Essen, though the city remained grey with soot and the hiss of locomotives drowned out birdsong. Within the Hohenberg estate, the season brought no relief. Clara's gowns strained now against her waist. She layered shawls and kept to the shadows, but each passing week etched the truth more visibly upon her body. It could not be hidden much longer. The choice was brutal but unavoidable. Speak to Eric or face discovery alone. On a night thick with rain, she wrapped herself in her plain wool coat and left the mansion by the servant's door. Her shoes sank in the mud of the garden path, and the city lamps flickered dim through the downpour. She arrived at Eric's lodgings soaked to the skin, her hair clinging to her face. He opened the door, startled. "Clara, God, you're drenched." She stepped inside, trembling from more than cold. The room was small, bare floorboards, a bed with a thin quilt, a single chair by the stove, but the warmth of the fire wrapped around her. For a moment she could not speak. "Clara?" he asked gently, brushing wet strands from her forehead. Her breath shuddered. "I can't keep this from you any longer." His eyes searched hers, steady, unflinching. "Then don't." She drew a breath so deep it ached. Her hand pressed to her abdomen. "I'm carrying your child." Silence fell like a hammer. The fire crackled. Rain battered the roof. Eric stared at her, his expression unreadable. At last he moved, slowly, as though the air had thickened, placing his hand over hers. His voice, when it came, was hoarse. Ours. Yes. Her whisper trembled with both fear and relief. He pulled her into his arms, holding her with a fierceness that startled her. Clara, you should have told me sooner. I was afraid. Of me. Of everything. My father. His wrath. His empire. What he would do if he knew. Eric leaned back, searching her face. His jaw tightened. Then we don't let him know. We make our own life, away from him, away from this city. The words filled her with warmth and dread all at once. To leave, it sounded like salvation, but also like exile. Could she abandon the inheritance she had been trained all her life to guard? Could she cast away the empire of iron, and with it, her identity as more than just her father's shadow? I can't simply walk away, she said, voice breaking. Everything I've worked for, everything he built, it would all be lost. What is an empire worth, Eric said quietly, if it costs your soul? The firelight danced across his face. Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to step into the vision of freedom he painted. But her father's voice echoed in her memory. Without this house, you are nothing. The following days passed in a blur. Clara carried the memory of Eric's embrace with her into the study, where she copied figures with trembling hands. Her father's cough worsened. He raged at delays in steel shipments, at politicians he called parasites, at rivals circling like carrion birds. Clara endured, silent, the secret growing inside her more undeniable by the hour. Then, one morning, the inevitable came. She was reviewing correspondence when the housekeeper entered, eyes darting nervously. The woman's gaze lingered on Clara's form before she spoke. Fräulein, forgive me, but Herr Hohenberg has asked to see you at once. In his chamber. Clara's blood ran cold. Her father never summoned her away from the study during business hours. She followed, every step heavy with dread. At the chamber door she paused, steadying herself. Then she entered. Friedrich Hohenberg sat in a chair by the window, his face pale, his breath labored. Yet his eyes burned with an intensity that made her throat tighten. On the table beside him lay papers, medical invoices, she realized, and notes from servants. "You've been keeping something from me," he said, his voice low but sharp. Clara froze. His gaze traveled from her face to her body. "Do not insult me with denial. I was not blind when I built this empire, and I am not blind now." Her knees nearly buckled. She had prepared 100 explanations, but now none would form. Friedrich's hand clenched the armrest. "Who is he?" The silence stretched. Clara's lips parted, but no sound came. "I will know," her father growled. "Whether you speak it now, or whether I tear it from the city myself, I will know." The rain beat against the windows. Clara stood trembling, the truth at last dragged into the light. The silence she had carried for months had shattered. The storm outside had passed, leaving the world slick with rain, but within Friedrich Hohenberg's chamber the air remained heavy, close, oppressive. Clara stood frozen, her father's demand echoing through the silence. "Who is he?" Her hands trembled against the folds of her skirt. To speak Eric's name would be to condemn him. Friedrich's wrath was not measured. It was absolute. Rivals had been ruined by the flick of his pen, union leaders crushed by his lawyers and his hired enforcers. What would he do to a mechanic who had dared touch his daughter? Her lips refused to shape the truth. Friedrich slammed his fist on the armrest, the sound cracking like a gunshot. "Answer me, Clara." Tears welled in her eyes, but she forced her voice to remain steady. "It does not matter who he is. What matters is the child." The words hung in the air. Her father's face darkened, red flushing beneath his sallow skin. "The child." His voice dripped with scorn. "A bastard? The blood of some gutter rat tainting my name? You think that matters?" Clara's heart pounded. Fear gave way to a rising fury. She had been his secretary, his hidden heir, his silent shadow. But she was also a woman carrying life. "Yes," she said, her voice sharp as steel. "It matters. To me." For the first time in years, Friedrich faltered. His eyes flickered, as though he had not expected defiance from the daughter who had always obeyed. But the moment passed quickly. His jaw tightened. "You will end it," he said flatly. Clara's breath caught. "No, you will end it," he repeated, louder now. "This empire will not fall to ruin because my daughter chose to disgrace herself. I have enemies circling me on all sides. The French, the banks, the unions. Do you think they would hesitate to seize upon such scandal? You will rid yourself of this mistake, or I will rid you of it." The chill in his words was worse than his rage. Clara felt the walls closing in, the vast house shrinking to a prison cell. "I will not," she whispered, her voice trembling but unbroken. Her father surged to his feet, his frame towering though weakened by illness. His breath rattled, but his fury filled the room. "You dare defy me? After everything I have built, everything I have given you." Clara lifted her chin, though her body shook. "You gave me a role, not a life. This child is mine. I will not give it up." For a long moment, silence reigned. Only the ticking of the mantel clock broke it. Then Friedrich sank back into his chair, his hand clutching at his chest. His face twisted, not with weakness but with something more dangerous: calculation. "Very well," he said at last, his tone cold as iron. "If you will not bend, then you will be broken. But remember this, Clara, an empire is not inherited by sentiment. It is seized. If you choose this path, you choose war." The word struck her like a blade. War, between father and daughter, between empire and freedom, between iron and flesh. Clara left the chamber with her knees weak and her chest burning. The mansion's corridors seemed to stretch endlessly, their portraits of stern ancestors watching her with silent judgment. She staggered to her room and collapsed against the bed, her hands clutching her stomach. The child stirred faintly within her, a reminder of what she had vowed to protect. Her father had drawn the battle lines. She would have to choose how to fight. That night, Clara returned to Eric. His eyes widened at her pale face, her trembling hands. "He knows," she whispered. "Everything." Eric's arms enfolded her, strong and sure. "Then we leave now. Tonight. Before he can act." Clara buried her face against his chest. The thought was tempting. Escape into the night, vanish into another city, begin anew. But her father's words echoed still. An empire is not inherited by sentiment. It is seized. Was she ready to abandon all she had learned, all she had endured, the empire she had been groomed to command? Could she turn her back on power, or must she find a way to claim it, even if it meant opposing the man who had raised her? The fire in the tavern room flickered low, shadows crawling across the walls. Clara sat in the circle of Eric's arms, her thoughts torn between two worlds, the warmth of love and the cold steel of legacy. For the first time, she realized she might try to hold both, but to do so would demand cunning, courage, and sacrifice greater than any ledger or contract had ever required. The iron will of Friedrich Hohenberg would not yield easily, and neither would hers. Spring deepened into summer, and Essen roared with heat. The furnaces bellowed smoke into the sky, trains screamed along their tracks, and men staggered from the mills slick with sweat and soot. The Ruhr was a crucible, forging not only steel but destiny. In the Hohenberg estate, destiny pressed close upon Clara. Her father had not spoken further of the child since that confrontation. He carried on with his business, dictating contracts, barking at correspondence, coughing into handkerchiefs spotted with blood. Yet beneath the surface, Clara felt the tightening of his net. Servants watched her more closely. A physician was summoned to the house, ostensibly for Friedrich's ailments, but his eyes lingered on Clara with a scrutiny that chilled her. Letters disappeared from her desk. Errands she sent were intercepted. Her father no longer thundered. He plotted, and so Clara plotted in return. At night she met Eric in secret, their conversations no longer of poetry or laughter, but of survival. He begged her to leave, to take the train with him eastward or westward, anywhere beyond her father's reach. But Clara resisted. "I cannot abandon everything," she told him one night as they sat in the dim tavern room, the air thick with tobacco smoke. "If I go, he wins. He will erase me as if I never existed, and our child will grow with nothing, not even a name. You think he'll give you that name?" Eric's voice was rough, his hand gripping hers tight. "He'll fight you until you're ruined. Then I'll fight back." Eric stared at her, seeing in her eyes the same iron that glinted in her father's. At last he said, "Then we need allies." Clara began to weave her quiet web. She reached out first to the bookkeeper at the steelworks, a nervous, balding man who respected her keen eye for figures. She whispered suggestions, small corrections that made his work shine in comparison to rivals. Then to the foreman, whom she had once only passed notes to. She praised their efficiency, sent small gifts, cigars, a bottle of schnapps, purchased discreetly through Eric's contacts. Piece by piece, she built a current of loyalty that flowed not to her father, but to her. She knew the empire of iron could not be seized by blunt force. It had to be turned like a furnace valve, until its pressure served her instead of him. But all the while, the pregnancy advanced. Her body changed, undeniable now even beneath loose gowns. Whispers stirred in the city, rumors of the magnate's daughter, of scandal brewing behind the gates of the estate. Rivals sharpened their knives, ready to use gossip as weapon. And Friedrich Hohenberg did not remain idle. One evening, Clara was summoned again to his chamber. He sat at his desk, not in weakness but in command, papers spread before him like a general's maps. His cough racked him, yet his gaze burned. "You think I do not see your little maneuvers," he said. "The gifts, the whispers, the ledgers corrected in secret. You are playing at power, Clara. Her throat tightened, but she stood firm. I am learning, as you taught me. His lips curled into a grim smile. Learning is one thing. Usurping is another. Do not mistake indulgence for permission. Clara felt the child stir within her. Her voice steadied. You call it usurping. I call it preparing. You are not immortal, Father. Someone must carry this forward. His fist slammed the desk. Not with his blood. Not with the bastard of some worker polluting what I built. Clara flinched, but she did not back down. You can fight me, Father, but you will not erase me, and you will not erase this child. For a moment, silence burned between them, hotter than the furnaces of the Ruhr. Then Friedrich leaned back, breathing hard, his eyes narrowing to slits. Then we shall see, he said softly, dangerously. Which will is stronger, mine or yours? That night, Clara sat with Eric in his small room, the fire low, her hands wrapped around a cup of bitter tea. She told him of her father's words, of the looming war not of armies but of wills. Eric's hand covered hers. Then we fight smart. If he plays with iron, we play with fire. Clara lifted her gaze. In his eyes she saw not only love, but resolve. They were bound now not only by desire, but by battle. The furnaces roared in the distance, sparks rising into the night sky. Clara felt the heat in her veins. The empire of iron would not pass quietly, but neither would she. By midsummer, the Ruhr was a battlefield in all but name. The French occupiers tightened their grip on coal shipments, patrols marched through Essen streets, and whispers of sabotage spread among the workers. In the mills, tension crackled louder than the roar of the furnaces. Strikes flared, were crushed, and flared again. Clara moved among this storm like a shadow stitched with resolve. Her body had grown heavy with pregnancy, her movements slower, but her mind sharper than ever. She sensed her father's empire fraying at the edges, held together only by his reputation and the fear he commanded. Fear could not bind forever. At the estate, Friedrich Hohenberg's temper grew merciless. His cough racked him, his hands trembled when he signed papers, yet his will burned hotter than the furnaces. He demanded obedience from clerks, foremen, and family alike. Clara bore his fury in silence, but each order sharpened her determination. One evening, after a day of relentless dictation, he dismissed her abruptly. She turned to leave, but his voice halted her at the door. "You think this house needs you," he said, his tone low and cutting. "But if you vanished tomorrow, Clara, the empire would not falter. You are ink on paper, nothing more." Her hand clenched on the doorknob. She did not turn back. "If you truly believe that, Father, then you have already lost." The silence that followed was like a blade drawn in the dark. Meanwhile, Eric pressed harder for escape. He brought her plans, routes by train, safe houses beyond the border, promises of a new life. Each time she shook her head. "Not yet," she told him. "If I leave now, I give him everything. I must hold my ground long enough to make it mine." "You're risking too much," Eric growled, his hand gripping hers tight. "Every day you stay, he schemes against you. He'll take the child if he can't break you." The fear in his voice shook her more than her father's rage. She pressed his hand to her stomach, where the child stirred faintly. "Then we don't let him. We fight smart, as you said." But Eric was not content with shadows and whispers. He was flesh, blood, muscle, rage. And when word reached him that Friedrich had summoned a lawyer from Berlin, rumored to draft documents that would disinherit Clara entirely, Eric's restraint snapped. "He's cutting you out," Eric spat, pacing the small room. "Everything you've endured, everything you've built, it's his way of burying you alive. I won't stand by and watch him do it." "What will you do?" Clara asked, her voice taut. "Confront him, man to man. Let him see I'm not afraid." Terror surged in her chest. She rose, gripping his arm. "No, that is exactly what he wants. If you walk into his house, he will destroy you. He'll have men waiting. He'll make an example of you." Eric looked down at her, torn between fury and devotion. "Then what, Clara? You tell me. How do we fight a man who owns every weapon but truth?" Clara's gaze hardened. "We use the truth. But not yet. Not until it cannot be ignored." The breaking point came weeks later. It was a sweltering afternoon when Clara collapsed in the study, her body overcome by the strain of heat, work, and the weight of her secret. Papers scattered as she fell, her cry piercing the silence. Servants rushed in, panic rising. When she awoke, she was in her chamber, cool cloths pressed to her forehead. The physician stood nearby, grave-faced, while Friedrich loomed at the foot of the bed. "She must rest," the doctor said firmly. "The child is strong, but the mother's strength is waning. Any further stress could bring danger." Friedrich's eyes burned with fury, not compassion. "Leave us," he ordered the physician. When the door closed, he stepped closer, his shadow falling across Clara's bed. "This ends now," he said coldly. "You will obey me, or I will see you locked away where no man will touch you, no scandal will stain my name, and no child will be born to shame me." Clara's breath came shallow, but her voice, when it emerged, was iron. "Try, Father, and you will learn what shame truly is. I am not your secretary anymore. I am your heir, and if you cast me aside, I will burn your empire to the ground and rebuild it in my name." The words startled even her. They rang with a power she had not known she possessed. For the first time, Friedrich did not answer. He stared at her, his jaw clenched, his breath rattling. Then he turned and left the room without a word. Clara lay trembling, but her resolve had hardened to steel. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The breaking point had come, and the war between father and daughter had begun in earnest. The summer waned, but heat lingered in the Ruhr, thick with soot and unrest. The furnaces still roared, but strikes bled the empire dry. Rivals circled like vultures, foreign occupiers squeezed tariffs tighter, and Friedrich Hohenberg, though coughing blood into his handkerchiefs, ruled his house with iron claws. But Clara was no longer the obedient shadow in his study. She had risen from her sickbed with a defiance he could not smother. The child inside her grew stronger, her presence undeniable, and with each passing week she felt her identity forging into something neither secretary nor daughter, but sovereign in her own right. The estate became a battlefield, not of guns, but of whispers, commands, and stolen loyalties. Friedrich summoned clerks to his chamber at all hours, demanding reports, swearing them to silence. Yet Clara knew. She had ears in the corridors now. Maids, bookkeepers, even a driver, all loyal to her through quiet kindness or subtle bribes. They carried her information, shipments rerouted, contracts renegotiated, letters burned before she could see them. In return, Clara sowed her own seeds. She sent secret notes to the foreman, reminding them whose hand had once corrected their pay, who had fought quietly for safer equipment, who had kept their families fed when Friedrich would have cut them off. She promised not wealth but fairness, and in a world of iron tyrants, fairness was power. Eric became her courier, slipping messages between taverns, workshops, and the estates. Each night he returned, his hands rough from labor, his eyes burning with devotion. Clara leaned on him more than ever, but always she hid the depth of her strategy. If captured, Eric would be crushed easily. She could not risk it. One evening, Friedrich summoned her again. His face was pale, drawn tight by pain, but his eyes blazed. "You think I do not see your little rebellion," he rasped. "You think loyalty can be bought with trinkets and soft words? An empire is not built by kindness, Clara. It is built by fear." Clara stood firm, her hand resting on the swell of her belly. "Fear crumbles, father. It breeds resentment. When you are gone, it will turn to dust. But loyalty, true loyalty, endures." His laugh was harsh, broken by coughing. "You speak like a philosopher, but you are a child. You would hand the wolves my empire on a silver platter. You mistake weakness for strength." "And you," Clara answered, her voice low and steady, "mistake cruelty for power." For a heartbeat, their eyes locked like clashing swords. Then Friedrich slammed his cane against the floor. "Leave me. Before I forget you are my blood." Clara obeyed, but not with fear, with certainty. The war of wills spilled beyond the mansion. Rivals noticed cracks in the Hohenberg Empire. One, Baron von Althaus, sought an audience with Clara directly. He found her not in her father's study, but at a workers' meeting in the city, a calculated choice on her part. "You play a dangerous game, Fräulein," he murmured as they walked a narrow street afterward. "Your father's shadow is long." "Shadows fade," Clara replied. "What remains is substance." Von Althaus smiled thinly. "And will you have the strength to hold what substance remains? Or will you burn with him?" "I will not burn," Clara said. "I will forge." Her words spread quickly, carried by whispers through mills and boardrooms alike. Clara Hohenberg does not bend. Yet Friedrich struck back. He sent word to Berlin, summoning lawyers to draft a new will. Rumors swirled that he intended to bypass Clara entirely, leaving the empire to distant male relatives, men who would sell or dismantle it before allowing her a share. Clara felt the weight of time pressing. She could no longer wait for quiet loyalties. She needed a decisive move, something undeniable, something public. The idea came to her late at night, as the furnace's glow flickered on the horizon. She pressed her hand to her stomach, feeling the faint kick of her child. If her father sought to erase her, then she would force the city itself to see her, not as a secretary, not as a scandal, but as the rightful heir. Her plan took shape in silence, as bold and perilous as any strike or sabotage. The war of wills would no longer be fought only in shadows. It would move into the light. Autumn descended on the Ruhr, painting the hills in muted golds and browns, though the city itself knew little of beauty. Essen was smoke and soot, its furnaces flaring against the dusk, its streets thrumming with unrest. The people whispered of hunger, of strikes, of the French soldiers who still marched with rifles through the squares. And above it all loomed the name Hohenberg, a name both feared and hated, bound to the empire of iron. Clara decided it was time that name meant something else. Her father's health faltered further. His cough echoed through the mansion halls, and yet his will remained unbent. He signed papers with shaking hands, summoning lawyers to strip her of inheritance, weaving last-minute deals to bind the empire in chains she could not unpick. Clara could not wait. The moment demanded boldness. She chose the day carefully, a Sunday when workers filled the streets after Mass, when families gathered in the market square. She did not wear mourning black or the sombre grey of her secretary's uniform. Instead, she dressed in white, a gown simple but radiant, her swelling belly visible for all to see. When she stepped into the square, Eric at her side, silence fell. Whispers rippled. Some recognized her immediately, the magnate's daughter who had always been hidden from public life. Others saw only a young woman heavy with child, daring to stand before them in defiance of propriety. She raised her voice, clear and steady. "I am Clara Hohenberg, daughter of Friedrich Hohenberg. For years I have served in silence, signing your contracts, keeping your ledgers, ensuring your wages when others would have stolen them. My father would have you believe I am nothing, but I stand before you as what I have always been, the true heir of this empire." Murmurs surged. Disbelief mingled with awe. She pressed on, her hand resting on her belly. "And I will not hide what you already see. I carry a child. My child. The future will not be decided in secret chambers by men who cough blood and cling to power. It will be born here, in this city, among you. If I inherit this empire, it will not be to rule by fear, but to build with fairness. No worker will starve while the furnaces burn. No family will be cast aside while profits are counted." A cry rose from the crowd, hesitant at first, then swelling. Some cheered, some jeered, but all listened. Clara had stepped into the light, and she could not be unseen again. Word travelled fast. By nightfall, every tavern in Essen buzzed with the tale. The magnate's daughter, pregnant and unashamed, claiming her place as heir. For some, it was scandal. For others, revelation. At the estate, Friedrich's fury knew no bounds. He struck his cane against the floor until the servants cowered. "She has betrayed me," he roared, "dragged my name into the streets like common filth." But beneath his rage lay something darker, fear. He knew the power of spectacle. He had built his empire not only with steel but with reputation. Clara had seized that weapon and turned it against him. The war of wills had moved beyond the mansion. It was now a battle for the city's soul. That night, Clara and Eric sat together in the quiet of his room, the fire casting shadows on the wall. She leaned into him, exhausted but alight with determination. "You've done it," he whispered. "They see you now. They see us." Clara closed her eyes, her hand cradling her stomach. "Not enough. My father still holds the empire. He will fight until his last breath. We must be ready when that breath comes." Outside, the furnaces roared, feeding the empire that belonged to neither father nor daughter yet. But soon, Clara knew, the Iron Crown would fall, and when it did, she would be there to seize it. Winter came hard to Essen in 1922. Snow buried the tracks, frost etched the windows of the mills, and the furnaces spat steam into the frozen air as if fighting against death itself. Inside the Hohenberg estate, the battle reached its endgame. Friedrich Hohenberg lay in his chamber, propped upright by pillows, his cane beside him, his breath shallow but his eyes still fierce. The empire had drained him as surely as the sickness that ate at his lungs, yet he refused to loosen his grip. Lawyers still arrived with papers for him to sign, contracts to amend, inheritances to reroute. His will was iron even as his body failed. But Clara had seized the city. Her appearance in the square had spread like wildfire. Workers hailed her as their champion. Foremen deferred to her judgment. Even rival industrialists whispered that Friedrich's daughter had more command than the old man himself. She was no longer the hidden secretary. She was heir in all but name. And still, father and daughter collided in that house of iron. On a bitter night in December, Clara was summoned once more. She entered his chamber to find him pale as ash, the fire burning low, the air thick with medicine and rage. "You've humiliated me," Friedrich rasped, "parading yourself like some revolutionary, and that bastard child, flaunted for all to see." Clara's hand rested on her belly. "This child is my future, and yours, if you would only see it." His eyes blazed. "My future is forged in steel, not in shame." He coughed violently, crimson staining his handkerchief. When he recovered, his voice was low but deadly. "I will not yield to you. Not now, not ever." Clara stepped closer, her shadow falling across his chair. "Then you will lose everything. The workers are already with me. The foremen too. Even your rivals whisper that your reign is ending. You can sign 1,000 papers, summon a dozen lawyers, but when the furnaces burn tomorrow, they will burn for me." For a moment, silence hung heavy between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Friedrich's hand trembled on his cane. His eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with something Clara had never seen in him before, recognition. "You are my daughter," he whispered. "Iron after all." Then his breath faltered. His chest heaved once, twice, and he slumped against the pillows. The cane slipped from his hand. The great Friedrich Hohenberg, magnate of iron, was gone. The days that followed blurred into thunder. The city roared with rumor. The mills faltered, uncertain whose orders to follow. Rivals schemed to seize the empire. Lawyers argued over wills and signatures. But Clara did not falter. She stepped into her father's study, her study now, sat behind the vast oak desk, and summoned the men who once obeyed only him. Her voice was steady. "The empire is mine. If you wish to see it endure, you will follow me. If not, leave now." None left. By the time the new year dawned, the name Hohenberg no longer meant only fear. It meant Clara. Workers whispered her promises, rivals measured her resolve, and in the mansion on the hill, the fires burned again under her command. In the spring, she bore a son. The city called him the child of the furnaces, born of iron and defiance. To some, he was scandal. To others, salvation. To Clara, he was proof that she had seized what her father claimed she could not. Both empire and life, both power and love. The double life was over. The secretary had become sovereign. And in the smoke of Essen, under the endless roar of iron, a new dynasty began. And so the Iron Crown passed, not by the will of men, but by the fire of a daughter who refused to bend. If you want more stories of power, betrayal, and survival, make sure to subscribe here on Eternal Obsidian.